It was a handshake that was 65 years in the making. Senior leaders from China and Taiwan holding their first official talks Tuesday since nationalists fled the mainland and the advancing communists back in 1949. Relations have certainly come a long way since the mid-90s when Beijing test-fired missiles into Taipei's waters. And although the government of Xi Jinping still reserves itself the right to someday take back the peninsula, business ties have since gone from strength to strength. We're going to look at the thaw and the long-term prospects for Taiwan. Contrast them, if you will, with the souring relations with Japan, whose nationalist Prime Minister Shinzo Abe back in December earned a rebuke from Washington for visiting the Yasukuni Shrine, final resting place of top World War II leaders convicted of war crimes, this amid the saber-rattling over disputed islands between China and Japan. We're going to see how China's new president is taking it all, and look at how Xi Jinping sees his neighbors, all of his neighbors. Today in the France 24 debate, China's backyard. And with us to talk about it, Steve TSANG from the University of Nottingham's China Policy Institute. Welcome to the show, sir. Welcome as well to Douglas Weber, who teaches political science at one of Europe's top business schools, INSEAD, located just outside of Paris. Thank you for being with us.
Good evening.
Antoine, BONDAZ, who we're pleased to have in Paris because he's usually in Seoul, visiting fellow at the Erie Center the Erie Center of Korea University there. And from London, Alessio PATALANO of King's College. Thank you for joining us from the UK capital. Now,
good evening.
Even though there are two Chinas, they both have the same founding father. Hence this Wednesday's visit by that Taiwanese delegation to the tomb of Republican China's founder Sun Yat-sen in Nanjing. This, as the visitors announced, the two sides were actively discussing setting up liaison offices, another major step on an historic visit. More now with Nicholas Rushworth.
A historic handshake. These are top-level Taiwan and China talks, something that in the past would have been unthinkable.
We need to make efforts to hold meetings like this, but we must also think more creatively for the future of ties. I am willing to visit Taiwan at a suitable time in the future.
This is a symbolic confidence-building exercise and a sensitive one. There are no flags and no nameplates.
We are able to sit down today for a meeting to discuss issues concerning both sides, and we should cherish this peaceful and stable momentum.
Closer ties have been spearheaded by Taiwan's pro-Beijing President Ma Ying-jeou since 2008. They've centered on business links. China has become Taiwan's largest trading partner. However, there has been no political breakthrough. China still regards Taiwan as a renegade province armed and backed by the United States. Beijing last October said a political solution to the standoff could not be postponed forever. Official policy in Beijing envisages a one-country, two-system solution in the long term, like with Hong Kong.
Steve TSANG, how historic is this? We know that there have already been trade ties, but how much of a big deal is this?
Well, it is a significant milestone, as your reporter says. It is a very high-level conversation. I wouldn't say that it is the top level, because we have to bear in mind that the equivalent of the minister in charge of Taiwan affairs in Taiwan really is not very senior in the Chinese hierarchy. If we're talking about top-level conversations, we really need to be talking about talks between Xi Jinping and Ma Ying-jeou. We are nowhere near that yet.
And Xi Jinping himself used to be the governor of the province from where most of the residents of Taiwan come from, and he has relatives there.
Yes, Xi Jinping, in a sense, amongst China's leaders, have had an interest in Taiwan and some knowledge of it, and he is certainly the key force which is delivering the current talks, compared to his predecessor, who was willing to put relationship with Taiwan on a bit of the back burner as long as relationship were not in difficulty. Xi Jinping actually wants real political talks and movements towards some kind of a political deal before President Ma Ying-jeou of Taiwan steps down in less than 3 years' time.
All right, back in October, China's president breaking the ice in dealings with, again, what Beijing still considers a renegade province. Xi Jinping, quoted by the official Xinhua news agency, saying the two sides must reach a final solution step by step, and these issues cannot be passed on from generation to generation. Douglas Weber, this is really something that Xi Jinping has moved on personally?
It seems so, but I doubt that he can actually bring about any kind of final conclusive deal between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait in the period of his presidency. It's one thing to conclude all kinds of trade agreements, of which there have been many in the last few years, but this doesn't have any direct effect on the political ties between the two sides. And although many people in Taiwan, I think, are very happy to have all kind of manner of new trade deals and closer trade ties with the Chinese mainland, any attempt, I think, to change the political status quo in Taiwan would be very difficult and would be very strongly opposed, not just by the so-called Greens, the independence forces in Taiwan, but also by the great bulk of the supporters of the KMT, the party of the incumbent president.
I was going to say, the president, according to one poll, his numbers are lower than François Hollande's at 9%, Ma Ying-jeou.
You can't get much lower than that, but I would hazard a guess that if he should tomorrow announce that Taiwan is going to reunify with China, they could go lower still, because I think in Taiwan there's very, very little support for reunification with China, very little indeed.
Steve TSANG, in other words, is this warming of ties the kiss of death for the incumbent?
The president in Taiwan, Ma Ying-jeou, I think your reporter described him as being pro-Beijing. I would respectfully say that that is not the case. Ma Ying-jeou is not pro-Beijing at all. Ma Ying-jeou is the president in Taiwan. He knows that. He's very much aware that he can only move as fast and as far as public opinion in Taiwan would allow him to. There's no consensus in Taiwan in terms of the political relationship with China, and therefore all he can really do is to maintain the status quo and in the meantime make practical changes and improvements in the practical relationship, particularly in the economic sphere. He cannot really do a deal with Beijing politically, and therefore the idea that Ma Ying-jeou is pro-Beijing and therefore willing and able to do a deal with Beijing is just fantasy.
All right. Antoine, BONDAZ, listening to our two panelists here, it sounds like we're locked into this status quo for some time yet to come. Or will Taiwan's status change, either be integrated into China or be recognized by China?
Actually, I really don't believe that the status quo is going to change in the next few years, as the two other people say. But what's very interesting, actually, is the shift in China's policy. Actually, the cross-strait relation used to be very, very tense at the beginning of the 2000s and at the end of the 90s, with, as you said earlier, with China firing two missiles in 96, and then the Taiwanese bid to get to the UN. It was actually a very tense moment in the cross-strait relations. And now it's completely different. I mean, Taiwan is still an issue because, of course, Taiwan officially from the Chinese part is part of the Chinese mainland and should be reunificated to the mainland. But in the same time, it's not a problem in the everyday life, actually, of the Chinese leaders. There is a status quo. The Chinese military is getting stronger and stronger. It's getting much more difficult, actually, for the Taiwanese to move and to try to change the status quo. In the same time, what's very interesting, as you said at the beginning of your reportage, is the idea that now the problem is Japan. Actually, they translated the problem to Japan. In 2006, prior actually to 2008, Taiwan was a problem, Japan was not a problem. And it completely changed in the last 4 years.
And yet, Alessio PATALANO, China does a lot of business with both.
Absolutely. what we're talking about when we focus on the Sino-Japanese relations, we're talking about the second and the third largest economies in the world. Now, for many years, Japanese investments and indeed Japanese manufacturers contributed to create the solid foundations of Chinese economic rise. But I think it is a fair point to make that over the past 3 to 4 years, the increased political tensions between the two governments resulted in a relocation, diversification of Japanese investments outside China and across other parts, Southeast Asia and Africa.
And when it comes to those strengthening business ties, what lessons do you draw when you see now the strengthening business ties with Taiwan? The amount of trade has doubled just in the past 5 years between the two, between Taipei and Beijing.
Absolutely. I think that it is important to remind ourselves in this context that both Taiwan and Japan are democracies, countries in which the majority of the people are interested in their daily lives. They're interested in improving their lives. Therefore, the way the countries manage themselves in order to increase their interdependence, their connection from an economic point of view with the rest of the world is very important. And of course, since China is one of the driving economic factors internationally speaking, interactions with China are very, very important.
Douglas Weber, what's the long-term view on the status of Taiwan? What's Taiwan to become?
I don't see any prospect that Taiwan will be reunified with the Chinese mainland other than by force. And if it's the case that the Chinese leadership has resolved that they want to bring about somehow a final solution to the status of Taiwan in the foreseeable future, this sounds to me to be very, very worrying, because it could only be brought about by force and against the will of the great majority of the Taiwanese people.
If it did come to that, how would the rest of the world react?
Well, that is very difficult to predict, but let me put it this way, that if China were to attack or to threaten to attack Taiwan, if America would not come to Taiwan's aid, then the value of its status as a kind of alliance partner and security guarantor for many countries in Asia and the rest of the world would be immediately destroyed. And so it would therefore be a very important issue for the United States to come to Taiwan's aid in such an event, particularly if the military conflict should have been provoked or started by China. So for me, and basically, there can be no resolution of the issue of the political status of Taiwan for a very, very long time. The two sides must live with a certain amount of uncertainty and indecision.
Steve Tsang, are there lessons to be drawn from the example of what's become of Hong Kong since it was attached back to the rest of China in 1999? It's got that one China, two systems policy. How does that preoccupy the minds in Taiwan?
Well, let me start by saying that absolutely is the policy of the Chinese government. They would like to use that as the starting point and make modifications to make it work for Taiwan. But from Taiwan's perspective, there is simply no market whatsoever for the one country, two systems model that is being applied in Hong Kong. Even with that model as a conceptual model, the Taiwanese are not happy about that. And when the Taiwanese look at the reality on the ground in Hong Kong and how that relationship between Hong Kong and Beijing changed since 1997, and how the one country, two systems model is being implemented in Hong Kong, they will simply say, well, it is a wonderful system. Beijing, you can keep it for yourself. Just don't bring it to Taiwan.
And that is definitely the case, Antoine.
Exactly, because actually the situation is completely different between Taiwan and Hong Kong. Hong Kong actually has never been an independent country, even de facto. I mean, it was a British colony. And it came back to the mainland because it had to come back to the mainland. Actually, the Taiwan government is the nationalist government that left Taiwan in 1949. The historical factors are completely different, and the population actually is very against any unification. There is no consensus among actually the Taiwan elites and among like the Taiwan young people and population about a reunification with the mainland.
All right, and we have a comment from a viewer saying, with Taiwanese people increasingly against it, many still believe China's checkmate move on Taiwan is inevitable. Steve TSANG.
Well, Chinese rule on Taiwan being inevitable, I think, first of all, if you ask the Kuomintang people, including President Ma, he will say that Taiwan is already Chinese. It is just the Republic of China, not the People's Republic of China. But if you ask the DPP people, they will basically tell you that Taiwan is Taiwan. Taiwan is not actually even necessarily part of China. They are just not at this stage prepared to challenge the assertions of the Chinese government, which may well provoke a Chinese military attack. At the end of the day, we have to accept that for a democratic country of very significant population, over 20 million people, it will have to be the will of that people in asserting their own sense of identity. The Taiwanese at the moment are happy to be both Taiwanese and a very special kind of Chinese, not Chinese in the sense of the People's Republic of China. They are prepared to accept that. The more we wait, the stronger the sense of Taiwanese identity is likely to assert itself.
All right, we're going to pick up on these points and look at whether or not the neighborhood in around China is any safer or more dangerous than it was when Xi Jinping took power. We have one viewer who's blaming politicians all around. The ongoing tensions engulfing East Asia are the result of the war of words and, of course, security dilemma. We'll be picking up on those points when we come back. This is the France 24 debate.